안녕하세요, 셀리입니다. 오늘 썸네일이 좀 살벌하죠? 제가 잘못 쓰거나 부자연스러운 표현을 좀 짚어드리다 보니까 그동안 내 영어가 맞는지 틀린지 좀 누가 가르쳐줬으면 좋겠다. 좀 더 원어민의 자연스러운 표현을 알고 싶다 하셨던 분들은 너무 좋아해 주셨지만 또 반대로 내가 쓰던 영어가 틀렸다고? 원어민들 아무도 뭐라고 하지 않는데 뭔 소리야 하신 분들도 계셨어요. 매일같이 사용해도 아무도 뭐라 하지 않았던 표현이 어색하다고 하면 불편한 감정이 드실 수 있을 거예요. 저는 너무도 잘 이해를 합니다. 저도 그 과정이 있었거든요. 그래서 이 부분에 대해서 좀 더 구체적인 설명을 해드리면 도움이 되실 분이 많겠다 싶어서 타음쌤과 함께 좀 더 정확한 표현과 자연스러운 쓰임에 대해서 같이 배워보는 시간 갖도록 해보겠습니다. 기대해 주세요.
안녕하세요. 탐셀리입니다. 오래간만이에요.
Okay, today we have some questions.
Right.
Do people really say, "Can I ask you something?" to ask some directions?
Okay, so no, not for asking directions. If you want to ask someone for directions in English, usually you just walk up to them and say, "Excuse me."
Or, excuse me, I'm sorry to bother you, things like that, right?
Some kind of an apology, a polite apology. And then you just ask, do you know where the coffee shop is? How do I get to the bus stop? The times that you use a phrase like, "Can I ask you something?" are only when you're talking to someone that you know relatively well, first of all, and you want to get their opinion about something that matters to you. Okay?
So for example?
Right. So for example, you might ask someone, it would need to be a friend of yours. Can I ask you something? I'm thinking of quitting my job, but I'm not sure if now is the right time to do it. What do you think? I'm not sure what to do, and I want my friend's opinion on it, and maybe that'll help me make up my own mind. But can I ask you something really only applies to things you've been thinking about that matter maybe to your feelings, not to how I look today or how I want to change my look. It can't be very superficial. Do you understand?
It has to be important and deep.
Yeah.
Can I ask you something? Do you think your brother likes me?
Yeah, I wouldn't. Yeah, if someone said, "Can I ask you something?" It almost sounds like the thing you're asking about might be a secret. Here's maybe a more personal example. Your friend says, "Can I ask you something? I feel like my wife and I haven't been getting along lately, and I don't know how to bring it up with her because, I don't want us to get into a fight, Now, this is a very sensitive issue, right? How your friend and his wife are getting along together. And so when he says to me, "Can I ask you something?" he's not really asking for permission. I'm not going to say no. But that question is a way to sort of tell me, I'm about to tell you something important to me personally, and I'm trusting you with it. You could be sitting together, having some beers, talking together, laughing about something, you and your friend, and suddenly your friend says, "Hey, can I ask you something?" That immediately lowers the mood. Yeah, well, it goes from being funny to being more serious. Yeah, to being a little more, "Hey, we've got the fun out of the way. There's something on my mind."
Now that you said that, I was watching a prank video, and then this guy was driving, and then he asked a pedestrian, like, "Can I ask you something?" to see what are other people's reaction.
And what happened?
So lots of people were like, what? Really kind of looked surprised and shocked.
Especially because he's a taxi driver. He's a stranger to them. They don't know each other.
But there was one guy said, "Oh yes, you can." That was kind of point that everybody laughed.
He'd be the weird guy.
Yeah.
If I was the taxi driver, I would speed away. I wouldn't ask the question. I'd speed away.
Okay. So in class, when students have a question, what should they say?
Okay. First of all, don't say, "Can I ask you something?" You know why now. But when you're in class, like in most schools, you raise your hand. If you're a student, you just raise your hand. However you do it in your country.
Like this or like this?
Right. Whatever is normal for your class.
We would do that. 선생님.
Okay. After class, if you had a question for your teacher, the normal thing to do would just be to walk up to the teacher and say, "Hi, Miss Selly. I was wondering if whatever. can I use past tense verbs, whatever the question is? I don't understand how irregular verbs work.
What about then in a meeting?
Meetings, you might be surprised to learn, are a lot less formal. But that makes sense because in a meeting, the people together are colleagues. They've been working together. And so if you were in a meeting and someone was giving a presentation and you had a question, maybe since it's a group and we were all trained to raise our hands at school, like good little boys and girls, we might do that. I might do that, raise my hand at a meeting. Or when the right moment comes, a moment of pause, I might say, so if I understand correctly, or wait, this doesn't make sense, or I have a question for the group.
Or I'm wondering.
I'm wondering something, yeah. You could say almost anything. The one thing you wouldn't say,
can I ask you something?
You would not say, can I ask you something?
Then why did some people leave the comments saying like, I've been living in the US for 20 years and then it's okay. I use it so many times, nobody's corrected me. Or, oh, my English teacher told me that I can use it.
Okay. A native speaker might be confused by what you're asking them. They might have given you an answer, but not having understood your question. Maybe you went to the native speaker and said that you can't say, can I ask you something? Is that true? And if that's how the native speaker hears the question, of course, they'll say, well, yeah, you can say, can I ask you something?
Without context.
Without context. If you went to the native speaker and said, my teacher on 수능 영어 said, I can't say, can I ask you something, unless it's a personal situation. Is that true? I would be surprised if a native speaker who understands the linguistics of English disagrees with you. I'd be surprised if that person disagreed with you. Okay? And you go to a native speaker, which I encourage them to do, by the way. Check with other native speakers. But when you do, make sure that you ask the question with all the context that it needs to make sense.
I already talked about this in the other video. And native speakers, they don't often correct your English. So even like the foreigners come up to you say, excuse me, can I ask you something? It's kind of weird, but you still answer and then would not say, okay, that's wrong,
Yeah.
You have that kind of experience. You say something wrong, but nobody corrects you for a long time, that you believe that that's the correct expression.
It solidifies in your brain.
So with 쓰는 영어, you can correct your English and then we can learn what is natural and right way to say.
Right, yeah. Okay, so just a quick story that's kind of on the point here of how native speakers don't always correct you. We used to live in Korea and I was trying to learn Korean. I got into a taxi and the taxi driver spoke to me in English. I forget what he asked, but he said something to me in English. Sometimes when I go places in Korea, I don't want people to speak to me in English. I want to practice my Korean. So I thought I knew the right thing to say. I said to the taxi driver, 한국말 하세요. 한국말 하세요. And I thought that was polite because I said 하세요. Right? But this is the point, and I think you all can see what's coming up here. A lot of people might have just let me go thinking, all right, well, I don't have time to correct his Korean. But I think to this taxi driver, that sounded rude. And that wasn't something, he wasn't going to be rude to me either. He was very nice, but he corrected me.
Oh, really?
Yeah, he said,
what did he say?
He said, 한국말 해주세요.
맞습니다.
Yeah, 한국말 해주세요. Yeah, I think he did say it twice like that. And I said, 죄송합니다. 한국말 해주세요. And I appreciated that because getting that feedback from a stranger was something that stuck in my mind because it's not someone I knew very well, and so I was afraid of, hurting that person's feelings. Right? So don't be afraid to go ask for corrections, and don't be afraid to ask people, if I make a mistake, will you tell me?
Okay, I think we learned a lot about can I ask you something, right? So 다음에도 이렇게 또 저희가 잘 모르거나 헷갈리는 표현들을 가지고 와서 탐 선생님한테 제대로 배워보는 시간 갖도록 하겠습니다. Thank you today.
Thank you. It was fun talking to you.
All right. Say.
안녕히 가세요. 잘 가. Bye. Don't say 잘 가.